The broadcast is now starting.
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to another episode of the PixelMill webinar series and today's offering of developing SharePoint solutions for Microsoft Teams. We apologize for starting a little bit late, had a little technical difficulties going on, mostly on my end, but we're here now. We're happy that you're here, and we're so excited for today's session. The usual stuff that you guys are used to for webinars. If you have questions or comments or anything, there is a questions in a chat tab. Feel free to throw that stuff up there. I will be keeping track all throughout the session, and I'll sneak those questions into our speaker as they come in. We also try to keep a little bit of time at the end of our sessions for a Q&A session, so if we don't get to them right away, I promise we will get to them at some point. Also, let me go and jump back a little bit, a little too excited today. If you haven't joined us before, thank you so much for joining us for the first time. We hope we'll have you back. If you have been here before, hey, thank you for coming back. We appreciate having you here. Okay, enough of me blabbering on and talking about things. Let's get to our session today. Today's speaker, you may have seen his face before. You're probably seeing his face right now. He's up on the other screen. He is the president and co-founder of PixelMill and a Microsoft regional director and two-time Microsoft MVP. He is the one and only Eric Overfield. Take it away.
Right on. Thank you as always, Michael. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a topic that I have been investing a lot of my time in the last couple months. I'm really fascinated by the opportunities that SharePoint offers now into Microsoft Teams. Oftentimes I might look at a technology and go, that's interesting. I'm going to take my time to adopt it to see how it goes and whatnot. Microsoft Teams was not one of those technologies. As soon as my team was able to show me some of the power of it within, it didn't take but a couple hours of looking at it. I was fully hooked, and we moved our whole company over to Microsoft Teams, basically replaced all internal email. Well, then what happened is, of course, we wanted to extend Teams to make it do even more. And I'm a big SharePoint guy. I really love my SharePoint development, and the opportunity of integrating our SharePoint development methodologies into Microsoft Teams has fascinated me. So our attendance looks really great today, which I'm really excited for a dev session such as this. So that's really cool. This session is around integrating something in Teams that is not generally available yet, which is also really cool. This is bleeding edge stuff, but I think it's going to change the way that we're interacting in our communication and collaboration spaces this year and here in 2019. Because this is going to go GA soon. So this will be generally available very, very soon. Microsoft has been saying on their weekly SharePoint PnP calls that this is imminent sometime in Q1 here 2019. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, maybe sometime in March or April or something, we will see everything go live. That being said, everything you can do today. You can make this stuff all work. It's just not totally generally available. There are some known bugs. So get started now. Glad that you're here. We're going to have a lot of fun looking at how we can use SharePoint development techniques within Microsoft Teams. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, again, my name is Eric Overfield, president, co-founder here at PixelMill. I'm a Microsoft regional director. I'm a dual Microsoft MVP in the Office developer and Office apps and services space. What that really means is I do my best to straddle both the technical side, which is what my background is. I'm a developer at heart, but I do a lot more, I work a lot more with the business side now, and that's that Office apps and services space. Written a couple books or co-authored a couple of books around SharePoint and SharePoint development. You can always find me at Eric Overfield or ericoverfield.com. Of course, I'm also blogging at blog.pixelmill.com where you can find all things cool about PixelMill. So thank you all for joining us. PixelMill is, did I miss something there?
I'm not seeing your screen. I'm only seeing your camera. So if you're sharing your presentation, we're not.
I most certainly am. Thank you for interrupting me. Well, you don't need just my camera here. So let me go.
I do what I can. I interrupt when I can.
Figure out why you're not seeing my screen. Let's try that.
Looks like it should be coming up. There we go. Now we can see it. Okay. Continue on. Don't mind me.
Excellent. Oh, great technological day. Whoops. See, it keeps flipping back on me. All right. So if you'd like to know more about PixelMill, who's sponsoring this webinar today, we're a digital workspace agency based out of California here. We're building portals and solutions for our clients using Office 365, Azure, SharePoint, and now a lot more Microsoft Teams stuff. So we help you figure out how to build that right solution. We do a lot of discovery now with our clients to help them figure out what's the best solution for them. We architect it. We then help them build it and help maintain it. In this new cloud world where everything's evergreen, Our clients are finding more of a need to have a partner there with them who knows this technology, can keep up to date with this stuff, and that's what we're here doing. And I'm doing my best to always stay on the bleeding edge personally so that I know what's coming, and then we help our clients figure that stuff out. Anywhere from, yes, we're still working on SharePoint 2010 for some clients, all the way up, of course, into modern SharePoint. So you can always learn about us at pixelmill.com or blog.pixelmill.com or at PixelMill Excellent. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at what we're going to be talking about here for the next couple minutes. This is not going to be one of our longer webinars. The technology here is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I just want to go over those pieces. So I want to start with looking at Teams app development and how we are able to work within Teams, and this is Microsoft Teams, to customize it and to make it do a lot more stuff than it could do out of the box, which is a good thing. Microsoft thought this thing out, and they said, hey, we know people will want to extend what Microsoft Teams can do. Let's build a development model, and let's make that work. Great, so let's go over that first. Then we'll look at how SharePoint can fit into that, why we're even talking about working with SharePoint development within Teams, what that has to offer. And then we'll go into the meat of it. That's where we'll stay at that 100, 200 level kind of stuff in the beginning. Then we'll get into the 300 level components. We'll look at the plumbing. We'll actually go through step by step how it is that we will be integrating SharePoint Framework into Teams. How do we create the project properly? How do we make sure all the prerequisites are set? How do we build a web part to do what we want it to do? And then also look at how we're able to use a new context, which allows us to know if our web part is being loaded in Teams or SharePoint, which is really cool and can offer all sorts of opportunities there as well. And there will be stat code there at the end. So 100, 200 level in the beginning, let's go over the overview, and then we'll dig into all that fun code. So let's first look at and start at the foundational base of Microsoft Teams and the development model, the app development model that has been provided to us. So when Microsoft Teams came out, they basically built this native app model. They built this model that would allow you to extend Microsoft Teams in lots of different ways. This is an interesting model how they made it work, and it's really extendable, which is super cool. The idea of the Teams app development model is effectively you tell Teams that I have this application, I have this bot, a web service, I have something over somewhere else that will be doing things. And you create what's called this manifest file. It's a text file, it's a JSON file that describes how Teams will interact with your app, this thing that you build, this web service that you build. And that's really it. So the hard part really is building this web service, building this thing that will do all the work for you. Typically that would be hosted over in Azure, be hosted over in AWS, or maybe it's a third-party cloud application such as Twitter or Twilio or Jira or all kinds of things. They might have built a Teams app, which is basically they would have built a web service over in their cloud. They upload this text file, this JSON file into Teams that says, hey Teams, this is an app that exists, and here is how you interact with me, this web service that I built. That's really fascinating. I could spend a long time kind of going through the nuances, but you'll hopefully see if you're missing what I'm saying, don't worry, we're going to get more into that throughout this whole conversation. So what's really cool about this model is that your team app is basically going to serve back to Teams text, JSON, a web page. Effectively, it's returning back to Teams more static content, some sort of resulted content, meaning that your app can be built in any language that you want. Because you're going to be hosting your app in Teams. You're going to host it somewhere. And again, let's just say Azure. You can now build it in C#. You can even PowerShell. You can definitely use Java. You can use all sorts of techniques and languages to build your actual app, the actual workhorse of your Teams app. Super cool. So then what you can do with the Teams apps is you could, of course, build custom tabs. So we'll look at Teams. For those of you who are new to Teams, we're going to look at Teams in the first demo, kind of what we're talking about here. You can add your own tabs, your own custom tabs. Maybe you wanted to natively go into something like Twilio, or you have Jira, let's say, and you wanted a Jira tab. You could actually build a tab that would go and interact with Jira for you, and that you'd go to the Jira tab within a specific channel, and you could then present any content you want there. You could also build bots as well. So a bot would be directly in line in your conversation. You could mention your bot, ask it a question, and then you build a bot using most likely something like the Microsoft Bot Framework hosted over in Azure that can interact with those requests that come in as messages and can respond. And effectively what a bot is, it's a web service. A bot, the bot framework, really is just a web service that exists. It's a bucket, container that exists. It accepts input in, very structured, defined input in, and it will do whatever your code does, and it will send back a response. It's pretty cool and pretty simple, actually, really nice. So you can definitely build bots using Teams, the Teams app model. You can also build connectors. This is a way to connect effectively with external sources, such as maybe Twitter or Twilio or Jira or something like that, where you want to put messages into your Teams channel. And when those messages come back, they could be adaptive cards, they could be messaging extensions as well, so that you can really interact with the conversations. You can even have activity feed integrations. You can push content into people's activity feeds using your apps. And how this is all driven, and when you go through a lot of the documentation that Microsoft provides, you find that they're basically saying all of these different services, they're all going to be a bot. You're going to be building this sort of bot over in the bot framework over in this web service that you build. And you're going to be sending back structured JSON. And you're going to tell Teams, hey, this is what I want you to do with this particular response. It's just cool. It's really fascinating. There's a big catch here. You're going to need to host this app somewhere. You're going to have to create a web service, a virtual machine, Azure Functions, something. Lambda Functions over AWS, something. You'll have to create it and host it somewhere and build that whole box, that whole container to be able to interact with Teams. Now, on another thing that you can do with the native Teams apps is you can build webhooks. These are outgoing webhooks. The idea being when something happens in Teams, you could be notified via a webhook. And again, you would have to build a service that could accept those webhook connections. But these are great things that you can do to extend Teams. And people organizations have been building some really cool apps within Teams using this app team development model. If you want to learn more about it, I have a couple links for you. And the slide deck and the recording of this video will be made available shortly for you all. And you'll all get an email saying, hey, here's where it is, so you can all get all this information. But I gave you some couple links here. There's an app overview model, so if you want documentation. So if you want to learn just about general native Teams app development, I highly recommend that you start there and you look at all the things that are available. The documentation is really good. I'm really surprised in how detailed it can be very quickly. They give you this nice, great overview and then quickly get you into example projects to build tabs and bots and connectors and things like that. They've also built this really cool thing that's built within Teams, actually. It's really cool. This Teams App Studio, it helps you scaffold up native team app development. That's just super fascinating and really helpful. And on the design side, so Teams has a unique design. It has a specific design to it, and it has a specific look. And you really should interact with Teams using that look and style. And so, again, Microsoft is here to help you on that one. They created this Teams design guide, and so I'm building some apps right now personally for some preview kind of stuff, and in that I want my specific components to look like Teams, and so I have my design team helping me, and one of our lead designers, Kunal, who was on our chat last month talking about modern versus classic, a while back he looked at the Teams design guide and he said it's actually really good. There's really good information there, even for a designer who really knows what they're doing. There's some helpful tools there. So if you're looking to build native apps, as well as the next thing we're going to talk about, building SharePoint components for Teams, I highly recommend you also look at the Teams design guide, and it'll give you a lot of good overview, a lot of good helps and hints on how to make a component, an app, a tab, look like it belongs within Teams, because the last thing you really want to do is create something that's a jarring experience that looks like it doesn't belong. So that's kind of a quick overview of Teams native app development. And it's definitely worth remembering so that you know it's available. There's a thing I want you to remember is all of these techniques really require you to build a web service. You're building a bot framework, a web service, something over in some container somewhere that can respond to requests and they can send data back into Teams. So you need to build that. The other thing to think about and to remember is Teams knows about all this by a manifest file. There's a text file. We're actually going to look at that in a little bit, and we're going to use that in SharePoint as well. We're going to be SharePoint builds that for us. The SharePoint Framework Yeoman Generator builds this manifest file for us, but that's one of the key things to think about, because what's cool about SharePoint app development is a lot of the complexity of hosting this is all taken care of for us, but we do need to still concern ourselves with that manifest file. Excellent. So let's go ahead and let's kind of, this is 100 level, let's look at Teams, let's look at the app model in general and see what we can do there. So let's go ahead and let's go over to Teams. I'm in Teams. This is a development tenant that I maintain. I'm using the browser-based experience right now because it's a little easier. And when we get into the development component, it's definitely more solid right now because I don't want to have the preview bits on my Teams app. So desktop just works just fine. If we go to a specific team and we manage a team, when we manage a team, we're going to have this app tabs available here. If we go ahead and click on the apps tab, this gives us this ability to see what apps are natively available that we can then quickly add to our specific team. There's also more tabs up in the upper right-hand corner that we can click on. There's a whole bunch of apps that are available for us here, and it's super cool stuff. I mean, there's bots that you can quickly add. There's tabs that you can add. There's connectors that already exist. Just so much really, really cool stuff. One of the other options you can do, though, is you can upload a custom app. So I'll click on this now. Effectively, what it's going to say is that you can upload something. You can upload it for just me or just my team, or maybe for PixelMill. If I say I want to upload something, basically what you're needing to upload when you upload an app is you're uploading a zip file. And we'll get into that when we get into SharePoint. But that's really how hard it is to upload your own custom app. It's not very difficult to do. But simple kind of quick overview of how all of that looks. If we actually went into a team, let's say, and we went into a channel, let's go to this PixelMill dev, which is actually an organizational wide team. The tabs that I keep talking about here are the tabs across the top. And there's this one here where you can add a tab. So once you've added an app, you could then add you can add a tab. If that app includes a tab, you could then add that tab, which is what we're going to do with the SharePoint framework, because when it comes down to it, as of now, the only thing the SharePoint framework helps us do is build tabs. It's not designed to be a bot. It's not designed to be a connector. It's not designed to be a message extension or a webhook. It's designed to provide us the ability to quickly create custom tabs for Microsoft Teams. So very, very quick overview of what Teams has to offer for us in the scope of apps. So let's move on, because I think it'll be a little more fun to see what we can do more with SharePoint. So what I told you is that when you create a native Teams app, you have to build a web service. You need to build think of it a web server. I mean, you need to build something that can respond to web-based requests securely and safely. And it's not this hard. It's just you have to do that. But with the SharePoint framework now, you don't have to do that. A lot of that work is done for us, and that is really new. This just came out in the SharePoint Framework 1.7.0, which came out at the end of 2018. We're up to SharePoint Framework 1.7.1. They cleaned up a few little things. But basically what they did is they added this ability in preview with using the plus beta or the beta bits within SharePoint Framework 1.7 to build a SharePoint Framework web part that will then be available for you as a Teams app, in particular as a Teams tab. This is pretty cool. In the SharePoint world, what you're doing is you're building a web part. You're building this web part that's effectively going to be a single page app or a spa. And it's going to take up the entire frame, the entire window of the tab area when you click on a specific tab within Microsoft Teams. That should then work in both the browser-based experience of Teams as well as the native app version of Teams. The reason why there's some things that don't really necessarily work. If you're trying to connect to the graph, is what I've seen so far. It works fine in the browser, but in the desktop, if you don't have the beta bits in the preview bits on the desktop, it won't work. So I really don't want to go down that route right now. I just want to stick, because this is in preview here. There are bugs. There are known bugs. We've seen these bugs. They've published these bugs. Microsoft is actively working on them. I wouldn't be surprised if they're already done fixing them all. They just are waiting to the release of 1.8, which hopefully will come out again in a couple of weeks. Okay, so what then happens is they added this new component within the SharePoint framework, which is effectively this context. Well, we've always had this context within SharePoint framework, web parts, but in particular now we're getting this extra context, which is, am I in Teams or basically not? Am I in Teams or am I in SharePoint? And it's not that your web part needs to necessarily do anything different if it's in Teams or in SharePoint, but you've got that context. Maybe because you know that Teams might give you a different kind of real estate, or now that you know it in fact is going to be basically an app page, a full page app, you maybe want to use real estate differently. Maybe you want to add different styling, or maybe you just want to do different things. Maybe you want to default to a different kind of view. You can do that by basically grabbing this context. Once you know the context, you can then say, if Teams do this, if SharePoint do that, and it works pretty well. When you build your SharePoint Framework solution with a SharePoint Framework web part in it, what you're going to end up doing is packaging that up and putting that into your tenant app catalog. You need it to go into your tenant app catalog, not a site collection app catalog, but it must go into the tenant app catalog, and it must be set to be available automatically to everybody. There's a way within SharePoint Framework where when you add something to a tenant app catalog, the only way it can get added to a specific site collection is by adding an app. You go to that site collection and add an app. As of now, at least, that's not the case here. If you want something to be available within Microsoft Teams, you upload a solution and you make it available to everybody. We'll see all of that later in the demo, but that's just something else to think about. So you add that your SPPKG, your SharePoint Framework solution, up into your app catalog. Once you've done that, effectively, Teams can now find it. Teams can make it available. The second component there is that we need to then create this Teams app manifest, a text file, JSON file, which describes our app, provides basic settings, as well as tells the app where is it over in the tenant app catalog. Fortunately, all of that work is really done for you. That manifest file is created for you automatically. I just want you to be well aware that it exists, and also know that you can edit it. You can change it. It's one of those things where you may want to change titles, descriptions, things like that. It's all there for you, and it's very customizable. Provided you another link here. So if you would like to go through a 101 demo at your own pace, probably take you a couple hours to do it. I provided you the link so that you can see Microsoft's current documentation on how to create a SharePoint Framework web part that can then communicate with Teams. I'm going to keep stressing this a lot. We're in beta today, so really glad you're here to join me. I think this is really important for you to know this is coming, and when you have that free moment where your kids are asleep and you're just looking for something that you want to see what's coming to make your organization more productive, this is something I think you should do. Go ahead and download this. Go check the link that I provided, and go build. You'll follow along with here on this particular webinar, but go ahead and check all this. Just know this is in beta. So when you go show your project sponsors, your bosses, etc., your organization, just remember this isn't available today. Hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully sometime in the next week or two. But this isn't beta. So there are specific bugs that will probably frustrate you. One of the current ones that I've ran into is when you add your SharePoint Framework web part tab, you are allowed to customize the properties. Web parts can have properties. As of today, there's no way to then edit those properties. I mean, that's pretty silly, right? That's something that needs to be fixed. Absolutely. Well aware of it. I'm not surprised, again, if Microsoft's already fixed it. I'm sure that will be fixed in 1.8. To me, that needs to be done in order for this thing to really be live, to go GA. But that's one of the big bugs that I've currently seen. And there's other little things that you'll run into that most likely the thing you're running into is a bug, and you can either let Microsoft know through user voice. You can use different channels you may have. Ping me if you want to and say, hey, I ran into this bug. What do you think? And I could always try to forward it up into the SharePoint and Teams team on letting them know the bug exists. Or I can tell you, oh yeah, no, it's known. I've heard that they know about that. We can deal with it. Or you wait a couple weeks and see what happens. And there's also the PnP GitHub-based issues list that they're maintaining for SharePoint. You can also post that there, I'm sure, and say, hey, I ran into this bug. What do you think? Just remember, it's beta, so you might run into little problems. Now, of course, why? I think it's a good question we should be asking. Why? Why are we doing this? What's the big value here? What's wrong with the native apps model? Why don't we just stick with Teams? I think it's a very valid question and one that needs to be hit. That being said, I have got very strong reasons why I think that SharePoint's a great component, for a great framework for us to use here. And as well as there's times when this doesn't make a great model. So let's go over those. Well, first of all, I'm a big SharePoint fan, obviously. I think a lot of you know that. The other thing is the SharePoint development community is very large and very well established, and we have a very strong voice, and we get a lot of attention from Microsoft, and they pay attention to us. There are weekly PnP community calls. Again, so for those of you who don't know SharePoint PnP, just type in Google SharePoint PnP, you'll learn all about it. Microsoft is maintaining an open source driven community with a lot of non-Microsoft leaders in this community. And there are 150 plus people around the world on these weekly calls where where Microsoft SharePoint engineering is talking to us about what's going on, and they're showing us best practices, and the community members are releasing all this great new free code that people have created. Super, super cool stuff. Let's tap into that to work with teams. So reusing the code base that the community has created, reusing your own code base just makes complete and utter sense to me. As well as reusing components you may have built. So maybe you've built a SharePoint Framework Webpart to do something. Maybe you want to interact with groups or sites or people, or you're interacting with external services, or you built something to talk to SAP or ServiceNow. You might have built these components. You may have so many things you can do here. Let's reuse that in Microsoft Teams. Why should we have to go redevelop a new app service, a new web service to go and interact with Teams when we've already built that in SharePoint? So those are some really good reasons why I think that this would be super important and super valuable to be able to work with SharePoint Framework within Teams. In general, the way that I look at this is, though, if you are working with Office 365 data, if you're going to be working, if your component, this customization app that you want to build, basically a tab here, that you want to add to Microsoft Teams is interacting with Office 365 driven data. So it needs to talk to SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, interacting with groups, things like that. To me, this is a no-brainer to work with the SharePoint Framework, because the SharePoint Framework automatically, natively, already communicates very well with all of those different services. If you're going to be interacting with Office 365 driven data, I would even argue maybe with Azure, AAD, even Dynamics 365, it makes sense to me, and I think it's almost a no-brainer that SharePoint Framework should be your starting spot on how you would build a custom team app to interact with that kind of data. If, on the other hand, you're looking to interact with external data, totally external Office 365. Again, maybe you've got something such as you want to interact with a custom Twitter feed, you want to interact with Jira, maybe you want to interact with SAP or something, or you've got proprietary data. You've got your own Cosmos DB warehouse, data warehouse of all this great data. It may make a little more sense. Well, Cosmos DB is in Azure, but still, if you've got this external data source, it may make more sense to build an actual native app using and building a bot framework-driven process that would be stored in some sort of Azure container to interact with that data for you. That does make sense to me. SharePoint Framework may not be the best spot for that, because it may not be overly great in making the communication work. It might be a lot easier for you to just have your bot do the authentication it needs and then to communicate with that external service. Maybe your bot needs to do some really heavy lifting. It has to do a lot of data computation and pull a lot of things together. SharePoint Framework may not be the best for that, because SharePoint Framework is client-side driven, correct? SharePoint Framework does all of its work in the browser, so be doing it in the Teams tab. That might not be the right place for you to be doing some of that heavy lifting. So at that point, it may make more sense to use the true native team app development model, and you'll build a bot, you'll build a web service elsewhere. And so the flip side of that is the SharePoint Framework doesn't require us to build this external app. It doesn't require us to build an external service, a bot framework, anything. All of that's handled for us. We create a web part, we publish it to our app catalog, we can now add it as an app and utilize it. Nowhere in those four things that I say you need to create a VM, an Azure function, any other web service, an app service. You didn't have to do any of that. And that's some really, really, to me, great value in using SharePoint Framework directly within Teams. Okay, the catch to all of this is SharePoint Framework only gives us access to the two tabs. We cannot create currently, and when I say currently, I don't know anything here. I don't know if Microsoft's looking to extend SharePoint Framework to be able to do other things besides work with tabs. But as of now, for sure, the only thing that SharePoint Framework helps us with is building a custom tab. So if you want to build a bot, if you want to build a webhook, you're going to have to, after on the webhook, you'll have to use the traditional development model, the native app development model to do that. But in general, so what's the value of providing tabs? Like, why would you want to even create a tab? What can you do there? Well, some big things that I can see is if you want to connect to external services, and then you want to present that information within Teams, within one canvas as well, that to me makes a lot of sense, because some things are just not maybe natively bot driven. You might not want to just have a quick chat of something. Maybe you want to present a big result of something. Just take general search results. You want to do some sort of search within a tab. You want to go interact with a lot of data from Salesforce or from Dynamics, let's say. It makes sense to me that inline in a chat in a bot may not make sense, where you want the Dynamics 365 tab that can go give you a list of all of your contacts that you're supposed to be reaching out to today, all within Teams, which is really cool because now you're in one canvas. And what I mean by that is you'd be in one application. I'm a big fan right now, and I'm definitely trying to move myself and my organization as much as possible to just living in Teams, where everything happens in Teams. Everything you need happens within Teams. When you need to get to SharePoint data, it's just a document tab within Teams, and it just loads the tab directly up there within Teams. You don't have to go off to a website. You don't have to load anything in a browser. You don't have to do multiple clicks to get anywhere. Everything is just living within this one canvas to your entire organization, and I think there's really great value to that. And so there's that value of tabs. So if you need tabs, if you want to work with external data, you want to present information from Graph or from Azure using Azure Functions or all kinds of cool stuff, a good canvas for that could very well be a Teams tab. And therefore, there's this value if you don't need to create an additional web service to host, to respond to receive and to respond to requests from Teams. This makes a lot of sense to me. Microsoft SharePoint Framework provides some really great stuff. So that's the 101, 100, 200 level stuff. At this point, it's time to now move into the meat of it. Let's go ahead and dig into what are we going to do to set up our Office 365 tenant to enable this, and then we will build a SharePoint Framework web part. I'm not able to check the questions, Michael. Let me just know if there's any questions on any of that kind of stuff. Happy to address them.
You have left everyone speechless so far, Eric.
Good. Yeah,
such an amazing job
enjoying
building.
Yeah. I think it's just so bleeding edge new, and that it's kind of like, just absorb it. Right now, I be in the absorption stage, and hopefully you're thinking through what could I be doing? Why would I want something in Teams? And maybe you're on this webinar because you've been thinking about some of the use cases. That's great. Think through then. Would it make sense to be in SharePoint Framework? Can a SharePoint Framework web part do what I want it to do? And if so, great. Let's build it in SharePoint Framework. If you're saying, no, we would have to build an external service anyhow because we're working with proprietary data that has a lot of data analysis that needs to happen. At that point, it might be easy to work with the native model. You just might need to now think about how you're going to render your results. So something to think about. Okay, so prerequisites. How are you going to set all this up? What do you need to do in order to enable this? First of all, you need to be in SharePoint Framework 1.7.0 or above. Currently, the latest version I'm aware of is 1.7.1. If 1.7.2 came out recently, someone should raise their hand. I don't think so, though, because 1.8 is imminent. And I did provide you a link here in case you want to understand how to get the latest Yeoman generator. Maybe you installed something 3-4 months ago and you need to know how to upgrade. I've given you the link to do that. So we need to make sure we're on the proper version of the Yeoman generator, or else this won't work. You will not have what you need. You're going to need an Office 365 tenant app catalog. Okay, now if any of you have been working with SharePoint Framework, you effectively have already done that step because you would need it. There are two kind of app catalogs in SharePoint. There's the tenant app catalog. This is one app catalog that's available to your entire tenant. Effectively, anything that's added to that is available to any site collection within your Office 365 tenant. Now, there is a way to hide some of that stuff, but I'm not going to get into those kind of details. In general, your tenant app catalog provides you a spot to put apps that should be available throughout your entire SharePoint tenant. You can also then create site collection scoped app catalogs, or an app catalog per site collection. If you've done that, you already have a tenant app catalog, because in order to create a site collection scoped app catalog, you need a tenant app catalog. Getting into some weeds there, but just something to think about. And we'll look at this again for those of you who kind of sure that, don't worry, we'll look into that. In order to add an app, you are going to need administrative access to Microsoft Teams. So if you're not a Teams admin, you're going to need to work with a Teams admin, or you'll need to ask for assistance. Another option here from the development side is you should be creating yourself an Office 365 developer tenant. Just Google that, Office 365 developer tenant. You can get a free Office 365 tenant for development purposes only, free for a year. Gives you all the goodies that you might want. Gives you 25 licenses as well. I think they're E5 licenses. Really cool stuff. It is only for development. Don't try to get away with using this in production. Microsoft is tracking through telemetry a lot of stuff, and you shouldn't abuse it, and you wouldn't want to, because at the end of the year, if you're not using it for development, it goes away, poof, gone. So just think about that. if you work in an organization and it's very difficult to get the access you may need, then go ahead and spin up your own Office 365 developer tenant, and you now are an administrator and you can do all this. It's one of the techniques we've actually seen with our clients is we'll spin up a developer tenant for every client we work with and use it for the development of their project, because that way it's very isolated. So to me, it's good for your organization to have not only a production tenant, but you should have a developer tenant for your organization. And then if you want one for yourself, you should extend your skill sets. Don't be hampered by licensing restrictions in your educational process. But I understand an organization is not going to let you dev on their production tenant. I mean, that's silly. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Okay, so the first 3 steps really not that hard. The 4th step is not hard, but it's something that you wouldn't necessarily know to do. When in your Office 365 administrative experience, you are able to manipulate and set settings for Microsoft Teams. And one that you need to do is enable side loading of apps and Teams. So it's this enable side loading of apps and Teams. That's what enables you to be able to pull in these external services within Teams to be able to do what you're trying to do. So that will be something that we need to do. And that's it. That was your prereqs. 4 prereqs. You're ready to go. Now you can go ahead and build a web part and get started. So let's go ahead and let's look at the prereqs. We're actually almost done with our slides here, folks. We have 2 demos and then a recap. That's really it. So let's go ahead and go through these demos and just really spend some time digging into it all. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's set up these settings that we need to work with. So first of all, within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, your SharePoint 365 Admin Center, I just went to the home page of that, so I had to go to admin. If you don't have access to this, you'll need to work with someone in production. Otherwise, again, as a developer tenant, I highly recommend that you, if you're not an admin, you set up your own developer tenant. So within that, you can go to your active users, and you want to make sure that you would be working with Teams with an account that has Teams administrative access. So typically, if you went into an account and you went to the roles, you can manage a role, and then within a role, you can go ahead and say that, so I'm a tenant admin, but there is a Teams administrator role right here. You'd want to make sure that the account you're working with has, in fact, Teams administrative rights. The other thing you want to do is you need to set up that side loading of Teams. And where we find that is over in Services. Within Services, there's this Service and Add-ins. If we go to Services and Add-ins, we're going to find Microsoft Teams. If we scroll on down, we should see Microsoft Teams right there. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's click on Microsoft Teams. If you go to Apps, oops, you will find it here. So let's go. Whoa, zoomed a little too far for you. So what I did was I clicked on the Apps tab here. You then get a whole bunch of information on what apps are available. And what you care about here is this allow side loading of external apps. Now, I've already turned it on. You need to turn it on. I believe there's a little bit of a delay. Once you say that you want that on, and then you go ahead and you save it, you'd save it. I believe there's a little bit of a delay, so it may take a few minutes, a couple hours, etc., before you can actually sideload. It's been a couple of weeks since I did this, so I just don't remember what the delay was, but it may take a little bit of time. Just be aware of that. So that's the major site the central and the Office 365 administrative stuff that you need to do. Yeah, that's not too hard, right? No, super easy stuff to do. So the next thing that we need to care about is our tenant app catalog. So for our tenant app catalog, we need to go to the SharePoint Admin Center. How you would typically do that, one way is that you go to the Admin Center and you go to SharePoint right here. The other way to remember it, it's pretty easy. You're going to be going to your tenant-admin.sharepoint.com. So I rarely click on that link through the Admin Center through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. I just go to my tenant-admin.sharepoint.com. As of today, hopefully those of you watching this recording into March and beyond 2019, this should be a little different. As of today, you are dumped into the classic SharePoint administrative experience. There's this this new admin setup that's coming out. I've seen public notices saying that organizations with less than 50 users, 50 licenses, the new admin center will become our default admin center, and then you can go back to classic because all of the options on the left do not yet exist in the new admin center. So something to think about. As of today, though, in the classic admin center, there's this apps apps option, apps menu tab. And if we go to apps, there's the app catalog. If we go ahead and we click on app catalog, if you do not have an app catalog, you will be asked to create one. Now I've already created one, so I was just sent to it. So all you had to do is you click on that app catalog. If you don't have an app catalog, it'll ask you to create one. You can go ahead and create it, and then you should be good to go. It will take a little time to create an app catalog because this is a classic SharePoint site, so it's using the classic provisioning experience, so it could take a couple minutes, etc. You would be able to get notification on that if we go back to the site collections, the SharePoint Admin Center. The site collection list will come up and it would show you how it's provisioning that. So you'll get status on it, but give it a few minutes, whatever, and you'll be good to go. So I actually want to go back to that app catalog because I'm going to need it. So I'm going to click over here on apps for SharePoint. This will get me into the tenant app catalogs. This is where I'm going to be putting my my app that I create, my SharePoint Framework solution, my SPPKG file that includes the web part that I want to include over in Teams. The last prerequisite that we need to worry about, I think I've already done it here. If I want to make sure that I have the SharePoint Generator 1.7.1 already installed. So in this case, what I'm typing here, you can see I already typed it before to make sure that it was going to work fine. npm list -g for global, and then I'm typing in the at Microsoft -generator -SharePoint, and you can see that I do in fact have the Generator 1.7.1 installed. If you're new to this, I would go to 1.7.1 rather than 1.7.0. They made a few little things that really helped make this whole experience work. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, those are all the prereqs. Pretty simple, not too much to do here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and spin up a new. I'm going to create a new SharePoint Framework solution because this always takes my computer a long time. So I'm going to type yo at Microsoft /SharePoint. This is going to spin up the Yeoman generator so that it can now provision out, it can build out my scaffolding for the SharePoint Framework web part. Let's go ahead and this always takes my computer a couple seconds to get going. So let's go ahead and just go back to slides. We're going to basically move back to the demo. Hopefully this will have woken up. And then we'll move on to some code where we'll have some more fun. So the next component there is now building the SharePoint Framework web part. So you would, of course, would type in the yo at Microsoft /SharePoint. That will spin up the Yeoman generator so that you can now fill out all the forms. During that process, there is nothing as of today that really asks you, do you want this for Teams or not? Because it's not really relevant. It's not a relevant thing. It's the SharePoint Framework web part, again, is a web part. What makes it enabled for Teams is just the creation of that, that manifest file, that app manifest file for Teams. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to our code. Let's see how we're doing. So this is still spinning up. Always, as I said, always takes my computer just forever to wake up. I have 16 gigs of RAM. I don't know what's going on. I've got a solid state hard drive. I got 4 terabytes of hard drive space. I mean, come on. Anyhow, all right, let's go ahead and while we're waiting for all of that, I already have created a web part. I want to go over the web part with you. Let's see if there's anything else I care about doing. No. I'm going to show you the basic code, and instead of using this web part, what I want to do is I do want to move this code over to the web part that we're going to create shortly. So, because I want you to see it live here. I want you to actually see all the components. What's going to happen here is if we go to the Teams, so this is new. This is one of the new things that you would see with SharePoint Framework 1.7.0 and 1.7.1 is this Teams tab. Oh, you know, I forgot something very, very important actually. This will actually not work. The reason why that won't work is because I forgot to type in +beta. In SharePoint Framework 1.5 or 1.6, I don't remember when, they moved preview code out of your native Yeoman generator experience. If you want preview bits, you need to type in this --+beta. That was the big one. That would have been a real shame because I would have said, what's going on? So now, unfortunately, we got to spin this up. When you type in the --+beta, what that is going to end up doing is creating for you this Teams folder. By default, it's going to add a manifest.json file, and it's going to add these 2 PNG files. Now, these PNG files, these are the tiles that are used to describe, not to visually describe in a sense it's your logo effectively for your app. It's any kind of little icon you would want for your specific app. So they've given you the kind of a base place to start. You of course would want to replace them. They even give you the dimension size 20 by 20 and 96 by 96.png. So that's pretty simple and pretty cool. But let's go ahead and let's look at that manifest file. Now the manifest file is JSON. It's, as I said, basically a text file. You could actually create this all yourself. It's just you might not necessarily know how. So what are some of the things that I really care about here? So there's a developer section that you can, let me rephrase this. I wouldn't modify most of the stuff here, but there are a couple of things that I would definitely modify. I wouldn't have a problem modifying. One would be something like your developer, the developer section here. The name of your particular app, I could see. You could change the description for sure. If you create new icons and you want them to have specific custom names, you could totally do that as well. And the icons don't overwrite themselves. So you could have 3 web parts that all use tab 20 by 20, 2020.png, and everyone would be unique and different. So you can totally do that. And then the rest of it, I'm really going to argue you're not going to touch as of today. So typically in an app, you would create different sections for the type of app that this is actually going to be. Is this going to be is it a tab? Is it a connector? Is it a bot, etc.? In here, it's a tab, and it's linking out for you how Teams is going to go into SharePoint to go make all of the magic work for you. So you can see there's this Teams login.aspx that apparently is going to be available somewhere for us. We don't have to worry about any of that. So super cool. Don't worry about it. And it just talks about some other stuff that you just don't have to worry about. If you're creating a native app, you would have to build this manifest file. You'd have to ensure you got it all right. That the Teams App Studio does help you with this though. So rarely should you ever have to touch this manifest.json completely by scratch. All right, let's see how we're doing here. Perfect. Okay, Teams tab live. That should be, let's do Teams. We can call Teams webinar tab live. All right, so SharePoint Online, of course, we want the latest. The current folder's fine. So this is the big one. So do you want to allow the tenant admin the choice of being able to deploy the solution to all site collections immediately? By default, that's no. You need this to be yes, because you need to enable this ability for whoever's going to install the solution for you to actually be able to make it available to all site collections, because that's how Teams is going to be able to interact with this thing. So I'm not going to be using any external permissions such as graph or anything like that, so I don't care. I do need to create a web part, and let's call it, I don't think Hello World's actually fine, but let's call it Teams Webinar tab live. I don't care about description. Let's go ahead and let's use React. I like React. It works. And now this is going to go ahead and spin all the stuff up. So let's go ahead and let's leave that. Let's go back to code. I showed you the manifest file, so that will take care of itself. So let's go ahead and let's look at the web part itself. So the web part itself is basically, we aren't going to touch too much. What we really care about is we want to set up a global variable within our web part to be able to grab the context of Teams. And where that comes from here is this Microsoft Teams.context. This namespace is available to us by default in the modern version SharePoint Framework. So we can create this Teams context container. That's what we're doing. What we then need to do is we're going to have to spin up this on initialization code. On this initialization code, effectively what we're doing is we're creating a promise. What this promise is doing is saying, okay, if there is in fact a Microsoft Teams context available for us, then go and get that context and save it in this global variable that we created up here at the top. Pretty simple. In my opinion, in general, if you care to know if your web part's being loaded in Teams or in SharePoint, you're going to copy and paste this 10-15 lines of code into your new web part, and you're good to go. Effectively, that's it. Very, very simple stuff. We just wanted to create this global variable that can go and get the Microsoft Teams context so that it in fact can be used throughout the rest of your your web part. Now you may have to send this context as a property into your React component if you in fact needed it elsewhere. There are other methods you can use as well, but once you have this context, you should now be able to use it. In this particular case, what I wanted to do is in the render function, I'm going to create a very simple little variable here called context title. And I want to change the context. I want to change the title of this web part, let's say a phrase, depending upon what context I'm in. We're not talking a graph here. We're not going to do anything complex. I just want this to be a kind of a hello world web part so you can see that this does in fact know if I'm in Teams or not. I'm going to change my React component, this hello world demo one, and we'll call it something else obviously in the one that I'm creating for us right now. And I'm going to create a new property for it called context title that I can then send in this context title variable. If we go look at our properties for our SharePoint Framework component, we'll see that I added that new property. And then within the TSX file, I'm going to use that property to just be able to say at the top, instead of a hello world kind of thing, I'm instead going to say, hello, I'm in Teams, or hello, I'm in SharePoint. That would typically be about it. So this is still doing its magic. Now the code should already exist. So let's go ahead and let's spin up the code base. So I'm going to go into, I'm going to open up the new source code. Eventually, there we go. Slowly. On Visual Studio, you can do it. Visual Studio Code, excuse me, of course. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at the source code that was created. You can see the Teams tab, the Teams folder was already created. That manifest file was already created for me. It already has my my title and stuff ready to go. So it did all that kind of work for me. If I go into my web part, let's go ahead and let's kind of copy over some of that code. It'll just be a little easier on us. So let's go ahead and go to the demo. What I care about, whoops, let's go ahead and go to the web part. And I would suggest you're going to be copying and pasting this kind of stuff. I would hate to really see anybody just have to memorize this, or I'm sure someone will be creating a Visual Studio extension that will help us with that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just moving over I'm moving over that code. We're seeing some errors here basically because the node modules isn't fully loaded. So once that all gets scaffolded out, we should be good to go. In my render function, I'm going to go ahead and move over the my simple code that will explain, that will be able to print out what location I'm in. And last but not least, I can just go ahead and send over that context title. So we will do that here. Perfect. And now in the component, let's go ahead and let's add a property for that. So that's going to be a type string. And then within the TSX file, instead of saying welcome to SharePoint, instead we're going to say, we're going to say this.props.context title. It will now say either welcome to SharePoint or welcome to Teams. Simple, cool. I mean, that's really going to be it. Now let's see again what we're doing. So this is still going, kind of a shame. I was hoping that would be done by now. If we need to, in interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and I will spin up the other, the one that I have existing. I was just hoping to be able to use new code. I wanted to show you that this does in fact work. Hopefully your machine will be quicker than mine. I could have used PNPM. I could have done other things to make it quicker, but I just found that just using NPM is for my package manager. Just typically works easier. It's just taking a little longer than I wanted. Okay, while we're waiting for that, let's go ahead and kind of keep moving forward. We have other things we can do. So in the Teams tab, in the Teams folder, we need to create a zip file. I showed you this, that there's a zip file I talked about when you want to upload an app. You need to upload this zip file so that the Teams would actually know what the app is. As of today, again, I hope that the framework will eventually automate some of this stuff. There'll be a gulp task to do it. I'd hate to have to build my own gulp task to create the zip file, but you can create a zip file here, and I can say that I want to add to a zip file. Let me rename this to something a little better, though. So let's call this Teams Webinar Tab Live. The zip file name actually doesn't matter. It's not really important. That's not where Teams is going to be driving any of its information from. That it doesn't care about that at all. It just cares that a zip file exists. All right, how are we doing here? Still going. What a shame. Let's go back to Teams. Let's get this stuff started. So we're going to manage our team. And here we go to apps. Within apps, we're going to want to upload an app. It's way down here at the bottom. We upload a custom app. From here, it's going to ask us to upload that zip file. Now, what I'm going to want to eventually do is upload this, but it's going to actually open it. It's going to attempt to use the app, and the app is not ready yet. So I don't want to do that yet, but that's where this upload is going to be that will allow us to upload that app. Let's see how we're doing. Still going. I'm going to come back to this because I want to, in interest of time, sort of just make this stuff work. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my team tabs demo 01, and what I need to do is I basically need to spin this thing up, and I need to make sure that it's added to my tenant app catalog. So the best way that I can do that is if I go ahead and I gulp serve this. Let's go ahead and we'll gulp serve that. So this will go ahead. Basically, I want to do gulp serve because I want to recompile the code. I want to ensure that it's fully ready to go and that it has been it's been served up. Does anyone have any questions? I really need about 2 minutes here. I need my computer to catch up. Michael, any questions coming in? Any thoughts yourself? Anything that you might have that I can help fill up some time here with something relevant to the conversation?
I have a feeling everybody who is here is much like myself and is just in awe of how cool this is.
It is, and that's what it is. To me, this is really cool. And I know when you see it, hopefully, well, it's just gonna be a little Hello World web part. But the opportunity here to extend Teams to do what we want, especially if we come from the SharePoint world, we can surface our own SharePoint content pretty quickly and easily now with all of the tools that are available to us. I really think that there's opportunities to just do some amazing, some really good, amazing stuff, and there's value to that, and not having to worry about building an app, not a true hosted app somewhere in Azure or AWS or on our own organizational environment. Just infrastructure just makes a lot of sense to me. We just have to build a web part, put it up in an app catalog, and we're good to go. And so for tabs, for me, anything that's SharePoint, Office 365, OneDrive, Planner, graph related, this is just no brainer. It's definitely the easiest way to do all this stuff. Okay, we're down to Webpack, and Yoad is still spinning its time. I love this stuff. Just like watching the wheel spin. Come on, computer, you can do this. I just rebooted too. Typically, I only reboot my machine, my workstation about once a month because it just takes so long to get everything going. There we go. It's slowly working. Perfect. One more time. All right, it just needs to get to reload, and then I will feel confident that the code has been fully processed for us. At which point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gulp bundle. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to gulp bundle. Oops, need to type it, spell it right. Gulp bundle. So I'm going to create the SharePoint Framework Solution bundle. So it will bundle it up. Now, you should all notice I have not typed in -- ship. I'm totally okay with that, and this is a good thing. What that means is that as of right now, the SharePoint Framework web part is going to point to localhost. So if I were to upload this app into that catalog and then give it off to Michael to say, hey, check out the new tab, it won't work for him because he doesn't have the code base running on his machine. The reason why I like doing this is it really helps with debugging. So if we can get this all to spin up for us, we will now be able to see how we can actually debug a lot of this stuff because we can make changes on the fly in our local development environment, and we would actually see that happen in the Teams tab right away. So once this all loads up, I will hopefully be able to show you all this stuff happening. We are copying static assets. I mean, this is one of the things. So there's another argument going on about using a newer version of Webpack. Not all this is Webpack driven, but a lot of this is. This should go a lot quicker with newer versions of Webpack. So the community is asking Microsoft to do their best to try to help accelerate this build process, because I'm not the only one that takes a long time to do stuff. I mean, these times are unacceptable for a general computer. This is my problem, really not Microsoft's problem. TS lint took 27 seconds. I mean, come on, TS linting 3 files. There's just not a lot of stuff going on there. There's just no reason for this stuff to take this much time. What are some other ones here? Yeah, TSC. So my TypeScript compiler took 18 seconds in order to basically compile 5-10 files. So extremely frustrating how long these things can take. And we can see over here, this is still spinning away, still downloading all my packages. You should not see any of these kind of any of these kind of delays. Come on. There we go. I've shown you all the other stuff. So let's go ahead and we will gulp package solution now. This one should take a lot less time if I can spell package solution. So what's happening in gulp package solution for you that are newer to the SharePoint framework is I'm now creating an SPPKG file. This is the actual one single file that I will push up into my tenant app catalog in order to allow that app to actually be available. And it is now taking a long time. Where I'm going to put that, so let's kind of set all that stuff up. So we need to go back to the Teams demo, unfortunately, but it will work for us just fine. We're going to go to the, well, there it goes, finally. Create the SharePoint folder, the solution folder. There's my SKPKG file. Let's go ahead and I'm going to have to copy and paste that over. So let's make that a little smaller. Perfect, it's done. Finally, okay, let's go ahead and let's go to my app catalog. So here's my app catalog. Let's refresh it to make sure we're good and clean. We're going to just copy and paste. We will drag and drop that app into our app catalog. It is uploading. It should now ask me, is everything okay? There's a couple of questions that I care about. First one that I care, do I want to make the solution available to all sites? Yes. Do not forget, yes. And we can also see this is being served from localhost. So this is not production. This is only for development. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. That is now deployed. That app is now available for us to use elsewhere. If I was to go to the workbench, so let's go ahead and we're going to gulp serve, no browser. So I'm going to serve up. I'm going to spin up the SharePoint Framework web part here so that it's now available to be used. What I should be able to do is go into my live SharePoint dev tenant. I'm going to go to the workbench. So I'll go to the SharePoint version of the workbench. And if I add a new web part, I need, of course, the web part name because I think it's going to be the hello world. But we can quickly check the name of the web part. Yeah, so this one's going to be hello world team demo 01 web part. So I should be able to search for the word team. Okay, should have shown up there. Not sure why it's not. I just added it. Let's see where we are on our gulp serve. It's taking its sweet time. Let's go back to the app catalog. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I lost my app catalog, so let's go back to my app catalog. That's going to be site/apps and SharePoint apps for SharePoint. And I'm going to look for that word Teams. And there it goes. So does everything look correct? Yeah, it looks really good. So it's my that's my Teams tab, and we even saw that it was uploaded a few minutes ago, right over here. So good. So everything was added just fine. Let's see how we're doing on our serving. Serving is just fine. Perfect. Okay, so we're serving just fine. So let's go back to our workbench. Let's go ahead and refresh. Oh, I've even got the work. No, I closed that down. I'm not doing a browser. I don't need that. I need this. Let's refresh this. So again, I'm looking at the workbench. What I'm looking for is that Hello World web part. It should be there. I know that I wanted to do this from scratch because I really wanted to show you something nice and clean. There it is. Perfect. So perfect. It should say welcome to SharePoint because it's knowing the context of where it's at. Now I should be able to make a quick little change here. And I'm going to go back to this web part, and instead of saying hello, welcome to SharePoint, I'm going to add in multiple exclamation points because I am so super excited. So it's going to recompile that eventually. And what then should happen is we should be able to see that change occur as we normally would expect eventually. Wow, my computer is running super slow today. So right before this webinar, Michael's internet went out too. So it must be the gremlin days of us that computers and internet connections are just not doing great.
I'm telling you, man, just one of those. It's the last day of February causing a ruckus. Hey, Eric, while your computer's still loading, I have a couple, maybe just little quick hit points you can touch on. You did talk about these a little bit earlier on, but just I have questions about it. So with Microsoft 365 coming out, how does this really play in that kind of space? Is it really affected too much by it? Is that something we don't know a whole lot about yet? How do you feel about that? I don't know if that's I may be asking too either weird of a question or.
I'll just say, so I'm real excited about what this is going to be able to do to enable our own custom components within Teams. To me, that makes Teams even a better central cockpit to the entire organizational communication collaboration area. So the communication being how an organization can communicate. And that's a whole other argument that would be a fun one to have, which is around is Teams going to replace the portal? And I have people I consider mentors that say, absolutely not. Of course, the portal is always going to be needed. I'm in the camp that says, no, I think that we're going to live more in Teams. And I think the SharePoint portal, your intranet, is going to evolve. And in year, 2 years, 3 years time, it's going to be different than what it's been classically. And I've definitely seen that with modern SharePoint and almost all the projects we're working on now. The portal is changing. It is a radically new experience in a good way, and we're looking to help drive even more value to the end user, to the employee who's just trying to get their job done. I'm going to get back to this though. So I did get those 4 points, and so that's good. So we know that SharePoint's doing its work, and we're running the recent code that I have. Now I did forget the other thing I did here in this Teams tab in the manifest. Unfortunately, I'm pulling in the wrong. The wrong web part. So this demo that I have actually has 2 web parts in it. There's this other liest demo web part, and what's going to happen is that we're going to load up the wrong app ID, the wrong web part ID, because when you add a new web part to a solution, every time you add a new web part to a solution, the manifest.json is overwritten, and I consider that a bug. I'm sure it will be fixed, because it's possible where you would have one solution that could have multiple web parts. Thus, you would want multiple Teams apps, team app manifests. So what happens is, and what we need to do is we need to ensure that we tell our app that we're going to put into Teams that we have the right component. And what I wanted to show you is the link to the component is based on the component ID. The component ID is your SharePoint Framework web part ID. So what that means is, in my manifest.json file, what I really need to do is I need to get the ID of my web part, and the ID of your web part is stored in the manifest file of your web part. So you can see my ID of this hello world web part is F1C, etc. So if I go back to my Teams manifest file and I change the ID, and I'm going to call this, let's call this webinar Teams tab demo. Let's go ahead and let's give it the short name of webinar Teams tab demo. We'll just remove that because we don't need it. And the last thing that I care about is I need to tell it the proper component ID of my web part. Perfect. So now, if I go ahead and save that manifest file, let's go back to my Teams folder. Let's go ahead and take these 3 files. Let's create my zip file. Send to. I want to compress that. There we go. And let's call that Teams webinar. Whoops. Webinar. Fine. Let's go with it. Okay, so everything should be spun up. Everything is now working. I have my manifest, my team app based with the manifest. I've got a web part that's loaded and spun up. I now should be able to go ahead and upload a app web part. Let's go ahead and go to this folder. Let's go ahead and switch to it. Let's add the Teams webinar.zip. Perfect. It is now attempting to add it. So it looked at the manifest. We can see it came across. It looks like I misspelled some things, but the web part is now available as an app. So if I now go to my general tab, my general channel, etc., I click on add a tab. If everything went well, we should see our webinar. I love that name, don't you? What should happen now is I've been asked to configure something. This is the configuration settings. So these are your web part properties. The current bug is you can only set this once. You can't reset it. So it's a known bug. I'm sure it will be fixed. We're not using the description really, so I'm just going to go ahead and save that. And the tab will be added. It's being added right now. It's being spun up. And you can see it says, welcome to Teams. Woohoo. Now let's go ahead. Here's the cool debugging thing. So I want to go ahead and work on my web part. I could say, welcome to Teams, even more exclamation points. I'm super excited. Teams can point, when it's pointing to the web part, it's effectively loading the web part as an app page, as a spa. So it doesn't matter. Teams doesn't care where it's being actually served from. It's okay that it's going to be coming from localhost. So what happens is once this goes to reload, eventually, we're in Webpack. My computer's running super, super fast. All right, come on, let's go. Everyone think good thoughts, please. Let's keep making this work. I want to show this last thing in the last 3 minutes that I've got here. Come on, let's go. Nope, copy assets. Whoops. Let's go back to it. Writing manifest. Let's go. Perfect. Reload. Okay. Let's go back to Teams. If we go back to a different tab, we reload our tab. It should now say, welcome to Teams. So isn't that really cool? To me, I think that's great that you can work within Teams, and this would actually work in your in the desktop client as well. I just don't want to have to switch tenants in that. So you can debug this pretty well. Now you don't have the console log the same way that you might have if you're in the app. You would have it here, but not in the app. So you can do a lot of really, really cool stuff, and you can really work with and develop in a reasonably good way without having to keep uploading a new app, etc. What you would then do when you're done is you would go ahead and say, great, I'm ready to go. I want to try this out. You would gulp bundle -- ship, gulp package solution -- ship. You'll update the your web part version most likely. That will create a new SPPKG. Once you do that, you will just upload that new SPPKG directly in your app catalog. It will overwrite as soon as it's done. You don't even have to do anything new in Teams. Teams will automatically know about it because it doesn't care. Teams is only pointing off to your component ID stored within the app catalog. SharePoint does all of the magic for you. SharePoint serves up the web part. It tells Teams how to go get the proper JavaScript to run the web part. In this case, now it's no longer local hosted. It'd be stored in your CDN or through SharePoint app catalog directly, and it all just magically works. So super cool stuff, super easy, I think. I understand this Hello World web part was not overly complex, but I just wanted to show you the basics that you can build this web part really easily. You can get Teams context, quickly package it up, you're good to go, dump it into Teams, and you are off to the races. So in the last few minutes that I have here, let's go ahead and just sort of look at the last limitations, and then we'll go ahead and we'll close for the hour here. Again, remember, this is still in beta. SharePoint Framework version 1.8 is expected to release this into GA. I can't confirm that. I don't know for sure until we see it, but I'm fully expecting that, so that will be a big deal. Those custom properties in development, just think about it. Currently, you can't change it, so if you need to build a solution to change it, don't. You're not going to. I have actually seen some ways to get around that. I wouldn't. I would just wait till Microsoft releases what they have. I've talked about how there's only that one Teams manifest file, so if you create an SPPKG, if you create a solution and you add a web part, you then want to add a second web part to that solution, your manifest file will get overwritten. In that case, my suggestion would be go ahead and create subfolders within the team tabs or create your own folder structure and create multiple manifest files for each of the different apps that you might want to have. I don't know if 1.8 is going to solve that problem. Hopefully it will. If not, just think about it, because I can definitely see a value of having one SPPKG app that would have multiple web parts that could be added as Teams apps. So there you go. And the last thing I really think is frustrating is I have to create that zip file. I really think that there should be a gulp task to do that. My recommendation is not to go create your own gulp task right now. I'm sure Microsoft will solve that problem, but if you are so inclined and you want to, go ahead, have fun. Otherwise, just create it yourself. So in general, what we looked at was the native Teams app model and all the things you can do with team apps, and then how that fits in with the SharePoint world. That being basically, we can build tabs within Teams that are driven by SharePoint Framework web parts. That's the key. You can't build anything else as of right now using SharePoint Framework for Teams. If you are looking to surface content within Microsoft 365, in particular Office 365 components, Graph, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., I'd love to know the use case where SharePoint Framework doesn't make sense. I'm sure they exist, but to me, I would start with SharePoint Framework and go from there. If someone came to me and said, I need a new Teams app, and they said, hey, we don't know what to do, what would you do? My gut would be to tell you, start with SharePoint Framework. Does SharePoint Framework enable what you're looking to do? Because it makes it so much easier to just build this thing. If not, then great. If you're not talking to SharePoint or Office 365 data, go off and build your app. Totally understand that. So hopefully that really helped. I really appreciate everyone's time. I think we're basically at time anyhow. So unless there are any final questions, I say thank you all. You're going to be receiving emails about getting this recording if you want it, as well as a copy of the slide deck to get those links and whatnot. We'll put the links in the email to our blog post as well. But thank you. It's been a great time. I've had a good time. Hopefully you have a good rest of the day. Michael, anything else?
I think that's it. I don't know that we could cram any more information into this, man. This was such a great session. Eric, thank you so much once again for being on here with us. Yes, as Eric said, everyone, keep an eye out for the recording and for the email for this. We'll be sending it out to you guys in the next week or so, basically as soon as I can get that up and loaded in there. Thank you so much for being here today, guys. Thanks for hanging out. We'll have more information about our next session coming up soon. We're just kind of finalizing some details. So thank you very much again. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great Thursday. And we will see you guys next time around the webinar bin.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.